So, Chuck, Vaughn just went through some of the alleged violations, the comments he made about Cohen yesterday, the social media post, for example, that Jesse Watters quote, the Fox News host who said that some of the jurors were potentially liberal activists who wanted to get on the jury. Are these obvious gag order violations to you?
I think so, but let me add some context to that. I think this is harder than people might imagine. So gag orders are unusual. They're atypical. You don't see them in the ordinary case. So violations of gag orders are more unusual. And in this context, Anna, a gag order imposed on somebody running for president is unique. It's unprecedented. I think he has violated it. That's my sense of it. I mean, he was told not to comment on witnesses, and he's been commenting on witnesses. I actually think of the questions in front of the judge, that's probably the easier one. The harder one is, what do you do about it, right? So if a judge issues an order, it's because he or she wants it followed. It hasn't been. But it's hard to imagine putting Mr. Trump in jail, at least in the first instance, right, while he's running a campaign for president. Do you give him a tongue lashing, right? Do you fine him? Do you tell him, don't ever do this again? I'm really serious, double secret probation serious? So, you know, what a judge ought to do in this situation doesn't come with a manual. And I do think he has to fashion some remedy, because I do think Mr. Trump is flouting his order. But how you do that, and by the way, whether or not that works,
right, that's another question,
is hard.
And we know Trump has been faced with gag orders before, partial gag orders. We saw it in the civil fraud trial. He was fined for violating in that case. But Danny, Trump's lawyers argues here in his posts on social media that they have been pointing to, prosecutors have pointed to, that they do not establish any willful violations, in part because they argue people like Michael Cohen have been targeting Trump and have been publicly speaking out against him in recent days as well.
Yeah, the argument there is essentially someone else is talking about me, I should be able to defend myself, which you could say, well, you could just not respond. That's an option, too. But at the same time, probably Trump's strongest argument is that he should be able to respond. This is not happening in a vacuum. Someone like Michael Cohen may be saying things about him. He feels like a response is necessary. And the other argument he might make is that, look, as a candidate for the presidency, he is engaging in political speech, which is, if you can say, more cherished than regular speech, probably is. It is one of the most safeguarded kinds of speech. Will that argument win the day? I'm not sure, because this is a case where you can just put the tweets, put the postings right before the judge and ask the judge, does this violate the gag order? I think the most problematic part is if Donald Trump took what Jesse Watters said and even changed it a little bit, because that is viewed as putting his own spin on it. And he may have changed the wording a little bit. I think that's going to be very problematic for Trump in arguing that, hey, I was just posting what other people were saying, which does, look, we're in a new era. It does raise the question, does a repost count as speech? And in many contexts, it does. But a lot of times we repost things to say, look at how silly this is. And it's not really our own speech. However, if you're posting something an anchor says and then adding your own words to it or anything, then it's probably your own creation. Now we're getting into copyright law, but really it's a question of, did he violate the gag order? And probably leaning towards yes. The judge will start out with low-level penalties because we're at the first rung of this ladder. At the end of that ladder, of course, is incarceration.
And we're still right now in the process of, in the court proceeding where the prosecutor is going through each of the violations as they see it and making their arguments before the judge. Conroy, who's representing the prosecution, saying, quote, he knows what he's not allowed to do and he does it anyway. He says whatever he needs to say to get the results he wants. Do you think there's evidence of that, Kristen?
Sure, absolutely. You know, when Trump makes these statements and then he reposts, as Danny kind of pointed out, he is directly talking to potential jurors. And I think one of the things that is key here when he talks about Michael Cohen, he knows that this jury is not sequestered. He knows that the jury could potentially, not necessarily, even though they have restrictions on them as to whether or not they can look at social media, look at the news and things like that, there aren't any restrictions on their family members and the people they go home to at night who may say something and say, hey, look, I saw on the news this, or hey, I don't know that you're on the jury. I may call and say, hey, are you seeing these proceedings? So they aren't sequestered in terms of whether or not they will still have access to this material. So by posting that information, you really do run the risk of, and again, this is the intent of a gag order, ruining the integrity of the trial proceedings. And so when you repost that, I do think there is an intent to interfere with the integrity of the criminal proceedings.
What do you see as worse, comments about witnesses or potential influences on the jury by commenting about them being liberal activists?
I think both, right? Because the jurors are just members of the public trying to fulfill their civic duty, right? You have one juror who actually said, listen, I know I was selected, but I don't want to be part of this anymore, and I'm worried about the safety of myself as well as the safety of my loved ones. And so when you have those types of things both affecting the jurors as well as the witnesses, it becomes less about self and also about personal safety. I mean, you saw that the judge's daughter was also personally attacked. So I think that both of them are equally detrimental to the case because, again, it could cause witnesses to not want to be part of the proceeding, which would attack how a prosecutor is able to put on their case, but then also it also affects how many jurors are willing to fulfill their civic duty. I know that we have 12 and then 6 alternates, right. But again, those alternates can come to 0 at some point.
Yeah, we'll see. And so far, that hasn't happened. We haven't lost any jurors at this point since they were seated, and this opening statement got underway yesterday. So Danny, we talked about the potential punishment here, $1,000 fine for each of the violations. That's what the prosecution is asking for. And they also said, please give him a warning that if he were to continue to violate the gag order, he could face time behind bars even. Does the $1,000 fine per violation make sense to you?
Of course not, but it is smart and it does make sense because what the prosecutors are doing is starting at square one. They know that they're going to be back before the court on another gag order violation hearing. Think about it. Last week, the judge set this for a week out, and a lot of folks said, well, why not deal with it now? You could probably have a gag order violation hearing every day on the morning before jury trial starts because it's an ongoing thing. Look at the wisdom now in setting this hearing a week away because now you can roll together all the other violations that have happened since, including just in the last day or so. So this may be a periodic thing, and the prosecution is playing the long game. They know they'll probably be back here on another potential gag order violation, and they're starting at 1. They're starting at the lowest amount. Of course, Donald Trump doesn't care about $1,000, but next time they're before the court, they can say, Judge, we tried a fine, that didn't work. Now we want more. And then they'll get more. And then eventually, and unfortunately, all roads in contempt land lead to jail. Jail is the final punishment. So the prosecution now is just laying a baseline, laying a floor.
Quickly, if you will, Chuck, do you see it coming to time behind bars?
It's hard to imagine, but Danny's right. If you can't abide by an order and fines don't work and the tongue lashing doesn't work, I don't know what works.
If this person weren't Donald Trump, how would he be treated?
Well, again, I mean, gag orders are unusual. Violations are unusual. So there's not a lot of data. There's not a lot of, sort of points of comparison. But I can tell you this. I was a federal prosecutor for a long time. If a judge issues an order, you follow it. And if you don't, you get punished for that. And that's what's going to happen here if he can't conform his behavior.
Hey, everyone. MSNBC has a new and improved app. You'll get real-time alerts and analysis, live blogs, in-depth essays, video highlights, and the best 2024 election coverage. Download the new MSNBC app. Here's how to do it. You tap on the App Store on your phone. You hit search on the bottom right corner. You type in MSNBC. You click on the MSNBC app. You click on Get or the cloud icon and enjoy it.